A frail 88-year-old man named Arthur entered a café, hoping for a simple sandwich to ease his hunger. The lively hum of conversation and aroma of coffee filled the room, but the atmosphere shifted as Arthur stepped in, drawing silent, judgmental stares. His worn, patched clothes barely shielded him from the chill, and his shoes, nearly falling apart, left his toes exposed. Each slow, labored step seemed to grow heavier as he approached the counter, his hands trembling with age and hunger. He kept his gaze low, aware of the disapproving whispers around him. Marcella, the cafe owner with a stern reputation, looked him over with clear disdain. Her stained apron and impatient tapping added to the unwelcoming atmosphere as she sighed, her expression cold as she took in his worn appearance. Marcella's gaze held an extra layer of prejudice as she looked at Arthur. I just wanted the cheapest sandwich, please," he murmured, his weathered fingers fumbling with the few coins he had, trying to appear confident. Marcella crossed her arms, her face hardening. "This isn't a homeless shelter, old man," she replied sharply, her words making Arthur flinch, his hopes sinking with each one. "If you don't have money, then don't eat," she sneered, her tone like a slap. Humiliated, Arthur took a deep breath to steady himself. "Please, anything you can spare. I'm just hungry," he whispered, desperation in his voice and eyes. The room grew thick with discomfort as patrons exchanged uneasy glances, but none stepped forward to help. Marcella leaned in closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "Do you think you can just walk in here and ask for free food?" she snapped. Arthur's shoulders sank further under the weight of silent judgment around him. "We don't have leftovers here. Go somewhere else," she scoffed, waving him off. Her words stung and the whispers turned into quiet, mocking laughter. A customer nearby sneered, "That's right, get out of here, old man. We don't want your company." Arthur's heart sank, tears welling up in his eyes. Frozen, he didn't know whether to walk away or plead once more. His stomach growled painfully, and shame overwhelmed him, making him feel utterly invisible, his life reduced to the sneers and dismissive looks around him. The silence grew heavier, as if the whole room had judged him in that instant. He wished he could disappear, but his legs wouldn't move. Just as hope began to slip away, the cafe door opened again, and an elegant, determined woman entered, instantly drawing everyone's attention. Isabella stepped inside with confidence, her well-groomed brown hair framing her face, and her tailored suit adding to her aura of authority. She scanned the room, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Without hesitation, she strode towards the counter, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Marcella, who had moments ago exuded arrogance, now faltered, her confidence shaken at the sight of Isabella. This wasn't just any customer. Isabella was a respected figure in the city, known for her luxury boutiques and influential connections. Her very presence commanded respect, and Marcella found herself on uncertain ground. Isabella's gaze flicked between Arthur and Marcella, her eyes filled with a quiet, powerful intensity. She stepped closer, her voice steady, yet laced with unmistakable disapproval. "What's the problem here?" she asked, her tone firm. Her gaze softened slightly as she looked at Arthur, who stood motionless, holding on to the last threads of his dignity. Marcella hesitated, her previous arrogance fading as she sensed the entire cafe watching with anticipation. The tension in the room was almost palpable. Isabella turned to Arthur, offering him a warm, reassuring smile as she extended her hand. "Don't worry, sir. Today your lunch is on me." Arthur looked up in disbelief, his tear-filled eyes glimmering with a renewed hope. Isabella's act of kindness felt like a lifeline, a quiet but profound gesture that eased the heaviness in his heart. She then shifted her gaze back to Marcella, who, visibly unsettled, tried to reassert her authority. "I've already told you this man can't be served here," Marcella snapped, attempting to regain control. But the tension, once directed at Arthur, was now focused entirely on Isabella, who stood with quiet, unwavering strength. Isabella's expression remained steady. "I think he can," she replied, her tone calm yet resolute. The entire cafe held its breath, waiting to see how this act of defiance would unfold. "This isn't a place for that kind of people," Marcella muttered, though her voice wavered under Isabella's unwavering gaze. Isabella stayed calm, but the intensity in her eyes made Marcella hesitate. "That kind of people," Isabella repeated, leaning forward slightly. "I believe we're talking about a human being, Marcella, not someone to be dismissed." The other customers, who had initially been entertained by Arthur's humiliation, now watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. The power dynamic had shifted. Isabella's quiet strength left no space for Marcella's disdain. Her presence filled the room, a steadfast refusal to back down. Arthur, who had kept his head lowered in shame, slowly looked up at the woman defending him. His trembling hands still clutched the few coins he'd gathered, and he wanted to speak, to express his gratitude, but the words wouldn't come, caught in the lingering humiliation. Isabella sensed his hesitation and gave him a gentle nod. "You're welcome here, sir," she said softly, her voice radiating warmth and compassion. "I will pay for anything he needs," Isabella declared, her gaze returning to Arthur with a look of reassurance. "He has the same right to be here as any other customer." Her eyes swept over the café, silently challenging anyone to disagree. Marcella, trying to reclaim her authority, scoffed. "We don't offer charity here. If he can't pay, he shouldn't be here. That's our business." "Business?" Isabella interrupted, her tone steady, a hint of irony in her smile. "Businesses are made of people, Marcella, and it seems you've forgotten that." She stepped closer to the counter, her voice now ringing clearly through the café. "I've been a customer here for years," she continued, "and I never imagined I would witness something so inhumane." The whispers among the patrons faded into silence, leaving a heavy stillness in the air. Marcella's face flushed as she tried to maintain her stance, aware of Isabella's influence in the city and the risks of a public confrontation. Yet, stubborn pride held her firm. Crossing her arms, she repeated, "This isn't a charity center." Isabella stood her ground, undeterred, her quiet strength making it clear she wouldn't back down. "If he doesn't have money, I can't help him," Marcella insisted sharply. Isabella let out a brief laugh, though her gaze remained unwavering. "You talk about charity, but you're treating him as if he's less than human. Charity is a choice. Humanity shouldn't be." Arthur, who had been silently watching, felt a surge of emotions overwhelm him. No one had ever stood up for him like this, and the humiliation he'd felt earlier was slowly melting away, replaced by profound surprise. He could hardly believe that someone, especially an elegant woman like Isabella, was defending him so fiercely. He struggled to hold back the tears welling in his eyes. Seeing his reaction, Isabella leaned closer, her tone softening. "Don't worry, sir. Today you can eat whatever you want." She placed a comforting hand over his, gently pushing his coins back toward him. "Keep these. Let them remind you that you're not alone." Marcella's embarrassment deepened with each passing moment as she tried to salvage her dignity. "Very well, ma'am, if that's what you want. But this won't happen again," she muttered, her pride still stinging. Isabella, unfazed, gave a soft, knowing smile and replied calmly, "Then perhaps I'll find a place that understands the value of kindness." Her words carried a quiet strength, and the café fell silent as every eye watched her stand by Arthur with unwavering grace. "What won't happen again, Marcella?" Isabella asked, her voice calm but firm. "The way you treat people here, because I'll make sure everyone knows how your business operates." Marcella froze, the weight of Isabella's words settling over her as she realized the potential consequences. Around them, other customers sat in an uncomfortable silence, many now reconsidering what they had just witnessed, though none intervened. With Isabella's gentle guidance, Arthur was led to a table by a now considerate staff member. Isabella's gaze followed him, a mix of sadness and satisfaction in her expression. There was something about Arthur that stirred a deep empathy within her, a connection she couldn't quite explain but felt compelled to honor. Once Arthur was seated, Isabella joined him, pulling out a chair beside him. "Now, sir, what would you like to eat? You're hungry, so let's take care of that," she said warmly, her earlier fierceness replaced by gentle encouragement. Arthur looked at her, overwhelmed. I don't know how to thank you, ma'am. What you're doing for me." Isabella smiled softly, shaking her head. "No need to thank me, Arthur. Let's just start with a good lunch, and then we can talk." A waiter, still cautious, brought a sandwich and coffee, placing them on the table without comment. Isabella's steady presence made it clear that today, Arthur would be treated with the respect he deserved. Arthur looked down at the meal, surprise and gratitude flickering in his eyes. His trembling hands reached for the sandwich, but he hesitated, as if fearing it might all disappear. "You can eat," Isabella said gently, her smile warm and reassuring. "It's yours. You deserve it." As Arthur took his first bite, the cafe filled not with judgment or scorn, but with a renewed sense of humanity, a reminder of the quiet strength in compassion and dignity. Arthur nodded, quiet gratitude shining in his eyes as he took his first bite. With each taste, the shame and embarrassment that had haunted him moments before began to fade. He chewed slowly, almost reverently, savoring every bite as if it were a precious gift. Isabella watched him in silence, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. Seeing Arthur reclaim a small piece of dignity and comfort filled her with a deep, inexplicable satisfaction. This was more than just a meal. It felt like the restoration of something precious he had been denied for far too long. A mix of compassion and something deeper stirred within her, an unexpected connection to this man that she couldn't quite define. As Arthur ate, the cafe resumed its usual rhythm, though an uncomfortable residue from the earlier tension lingered. Marcella, still indignant over Isabella's intervention, had stepped back to the counter, whispering to her staff and casting furtive glances toward their table, as though the situation remained unsettled, as though something more was yet to unfold. As Isabella adjusted her bag on the table, her eyes caught a glint from Arthur's wrist. An old watch shimmered in the cafe's light, drawing her attention. At first, she thought nothing of it, but a faint familiarity in the shape and style began to tug at her mind, like a distant memory just out of reach. "Mr. Arthur," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. "May I see your watch?" Arthur looked at her, puzzled, glancing at his wrist as though he'd forgotten the watch was even there. Slowly, he extended his arm, allowing Isabella a closer look. "Oh, of course," he replied softly, carefully unfastening the strap. "It's a keepsake from someone very important." Isabella took the watch into her hands, her fingers trembling as they traced the familiar contours. The cool metal seemed to unlock memories she had long buried, ones she never expected to resurface. Turning the watch over, her eyes landed on the underside, and her heart raced. There, engraved in delicate letters, was a name that sent a chill through her. Emmanuel. A wave of shock washed over Isabella as she brought a hand to her mouth, struggling to process the impossible. This was the same watch she had given, many years ago, to Emmanuel, the man who had been her world, the love she had lost so tragically. The realization left her breathless. How had this watch, something so deeply personal, found its way to Arthur? Her voice trembled as she finally managed to ask, Where did you get this watch?" Arthur, sensing the gravity of her reaction, looked at her with a mix of confusion and quiet respect. He shifted slightly, unsure of whether to share the story, but something in Isabella's gaze urged him to continue. Isabella couldn't tear her eyes away from the watch, as though it had reopened a wound she'd thought long healed. Arthur, noticing the intensity in her gaze, looked back at her, clearly puzzled by her reaction. "It was a gift," Arthur said hesitantly, his voice soft. "A gift from my son, Emmanuel." The name struck Isabella like a blow. Her suspicions were confirmed. Arthur's son was the same Emmanuel she had loved so deeply, the man whose absence she still mourned. Her heart pounded as a flood of emotions, sadness, surprise, and a profound longing washed over her. Unaware of the full impact of his words, Arthur continued, his tone carrying a quiet grief. "Emmanuel, he passed away many years ago. After he left, life was never the same." A tear formed in Isabella's eye, though she fought to maintain her composure. The shock of this discovery was nearly too much to bear. Emmanuel had vanished from her life so abruptly, leaving her without closure, without a final goodbye. And now, here was his father, a man marked by life's hardships, holding the last piece of the past she thought she'd lost forever. He was my... Her voice caught as she struggled to find the words, emotions choking her as memories and unspoken farewells surged within. Arthur, noticing her fragile state, began to understand the gravity of the moment. You knew my son?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise and a sorrowful curiosity. Isabella nodded, her emotions too raw to respond immediately. Finally, she looked at Arthur, her face etched with deep affection and sadness. "I loved him," she whispered, barely audible. "I loved him more than anything in this world." A heavy silence settled between them, laden with unspoken pain and memories. Arthur seemed stunned, struggling to process the revelation. Isabella clutched Emmanuel's watch tightly, as if afraid that this last piece of him might slip away, taking him from her all over again. "Why didn't I ever know about you?" Arthur finally asked, his voice wavering with sorrow and curiosity. Isabella took a deep breath, preparing to confront the memories and grief she had buried for so long. "It's a long story," she replied, meeting his gaze with deep emotion. In this moment, Arthur was no longer a stranger. He was the father of the man she had loved with all her heart. "But now, I think we need to talk." She held Emmanuel's watch carefully, as though it were delicate glass, ready to shatter. Every detail, the worn shine, the subtle engraving, the way Emmanuel used to twist it on his wrist while they talked, pulled her into a flood of memories she had thought long buried. Arthur watched her intently, his eyes glassy as understanding replaced his confusion. He recognized that look, the look of someone who had deeply loved his son, who shared the pain he himself had carried since Emmanuel's loss. Between them was an undeniable connection, a bittersweet bond forged through shared love and mutual grief. "He never mentioned you," Arthur murmured, his voice hoarse and low. There was a hesitancy in his tone, as if he wasn't entirely sure he was ready to hear this story, but something in him needed to know. Isabella sighed, still holding the watch gently, the weight of the past settling heavily on her. "I don't even know where to begin," she admitted, her voice tinged with melancholy as memories resurfaced. "I met Emmanuel when we were young. I'd just started working in a small boutique, my first real opportunity in the city. He used to come by with donations for the orphanage, the one where I grew up. That's how we got close." Arthur's eyes widened. "Orphanage?" Isabella nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "Yes, I was raised there from the time I was a child. I never knew my parents, but the orphanage became my family. And it was there that I met Emmanuel. He was so kind, always looking out for others. He brought laughter and warmth into my life in a way I'd never known before." A small bittersweet smile crossed her lips as she recalled those early days. And Arthur's expression softened, the story revealing a version of his son he hadn't fully known. "He was always so kind, so devoted, and so full of life," Isabella continued, her voice soft. "We had so many plans together, dreams for the future, until fate changed everything." Arthur sat in silence, absorbing Isabella's words. Her grief reflected his own, but her story revealed a side of Emmanuel he'd never known, a hidden part of his son's soul, preserved only in her memories. His heart tightened with a bittersweet blend of longing and gratitude, knowing he'd found someone who had loved Emmanuel as deeply as he did. "I never knew about that part of his life," Arthur murmured, bowing his head. "After Emmanuel passed, my wife, Victoria, always blamed someone. She'd say he drifted away because of a woman, but she never gave me details." Isabella's face softened, sensing the weight of his words. "I wish things could have been different," she whispered. "There were so many things we never got to say. I never had the chance to say goodbye." In that moment, they shared a profound silence, bound by their mutual love and loss for Emmanuel. "All I knew was that after he passed, nothing was ever the same," Arthur's voice was heavy with grief from years gone by, and Isabella shuddered at the mention of Victoria. She knew who he was speaking about, and remembered all too well the cold, tense encounters with Emmanuel's mother, a woman whose expectations were impossible to meet, whose approval seemed forever out of reach. Victoria, she never accepted me, Isabella admitted, her voice wavering. She didn't believe I was good enough for Emmanuel. That created a distance between him and his family. He was torn, trying to be the perfect son while wanting to live his own life with me. It was an incredibly difficult time. Arthur looked up, visibly moved, and for the first time he began to understand the weight his son had carried. He had never fully grasped the depth of the struggle that had drawn Emmanuel away from his family. Victoria had convinced him that the woman Emmanuel loved was the reason for the rift. But now, seeing Isabella's sorrow, he realized that the suffering ran far deeper than he'd ever imagined. "He never stopped visiting me," Arthur said with a long, weary sigh. "But it became rare. I thought he was just busy, trying to make his way in the world." Isabella nodded, her eyes misty. "He wanted to be there for everyone, but in the end, he didn't get to live the life he truly wanted." They sat in silence, bound by a shared love for the man they had both lost, their grief softened by an understanding that neither had felt in years. Arthur felt a new connection to Isabella, a bridge that brought him closer to the son he missed. Isabella, in turn, felt a small measure of healing, finding in Arthur someone who finally understood the depth of her loss. They had each carried their grief in isolation for too long. Now, in each other's presence, they could finally begin to honor Emmanuel's memory together. And then, when the accident happened, Arthur's voice wavered, his eyes clouding with sorrow. Isabella's throat tightened, knowing they were approaching the painful moment that had forever changed them both. Arthur's voice grew weaker as he continued. "That day, it all happened so fast. Emmanuel was with her, but I never knew exactly what happened. One moment he was here, and the next, he was gone." His gaze dropped to the watch in Isabella's hands, as if it were the last piece of his son he could hold on to. Isabella closed her eyes, steadying herself against the painful memory. She had been there that day, the day her world shattered. The memory was a raw wound, something she had tried to bury but had never fully healed from. Taking a shaky breath, she whispered, "I was there, Arthur. I was with him when it happened." Her voice broke slightly, but she knew she couldn't keep the truth hidden. "It was an ordinary day, but everything changed in an instant. I lost him before I could even understand what was happening." Arthur looked at her, his face etched with grief and a profound understanding. They were bound by this tragedy, each holding pieces of a puzzle neither could complete alone. In sharing this painful memory, their connection deepened, as if two souls shared the same heartbreaking loss. Isabella continued, her voice faint as she relived the moment. "We were on our way to a friend's house together, but we never arrived." She paused, her words catching in her throat. "The car. There was an accident. It all happened so fast. When I woke up, he was already gone." A deep, heavy silence settled over them, filled with the weight of the shared loss. For the first time, they both felt the possibility of healing, knowing they were not alone in their grief. The tears Isabella had held back spilled over as she covered her face, surrendering to the pain she had carried alone for so long. Across the table, Arthur watched her, equally moved, as silent tears traced paths down his worn, weathered face. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of years of unexpressed sorrow and regret. "I never knew you were with him." Isabella shook her head, trying to regain control. "I loved him with all my heart," she said, her voice thick with grief. "And I lost everything that day." She had tried to move forward, but the past had kept its hold on her. Meanwhile, Arthur had sunk deeper into sorrow, his life slowly reduced to what Isabella now saw before her, a tired, broken man clinging to memories, trying to survive in the ruins of everything he'd lost. In that shared moment of vulnerability, their losses merged. binding them in a silent understanding. They were both survivors of Emmanuel's absence, each carrying different fragments of the same tragic story. And for the first time, they could grieve together, no longer alone in the shadows of their memories. "I can't believe it," Arthur murmured, shaking his head slowly, almost in disbelief. "You were the woman he loved, and I never knew how much that meant to him." Isabella quickly wiped her tears, struggling to maintain her composure. "I didn't realize he was your son until now, but seeing the watch, it brought it all back. All the memories." She looked down at the watch, remembering how Emmanuel had always worn it, the gift she'd given him when they'd started making plans for a future together. It had been a symbol of their love and hope. Arthur seemed lost in his own thoughts, his gaze drifting to the past. "He spoke little about you," he continued, almost in a whisper, "but I could feel something was pulling him away from us." A sorrowful understanding filled his eyes as he added, "Victoria, my wife, she could never accept the idea of Emmanuel being with someone, not from our level." The words were heavy, laden with regret. Isabella looked at him, her heart aching not only for the love she'd lost, but also for the struggle Emmanuel must have endured, caught between two worlds. For the first time, Arthur began to see beyond the pain of his son's absence, realizing the depth of Emmanuel's internal conflict. In this shared moment, they both felt the weight of the expectations and misunderstandings that had kept them apart from the man they had each loved in their own way. "She always wanted him to marry someone from society, someone who could elevate our position." Arthur's voice trembled, thick with guilt and sadness. Isabella nodded, her own memories mirroring his words. "She hated me," she murmured. "Every time I tried to be close to him, I felt her disdain, and Emmanuel, he was trying so hard to please everyone. He was caught between two worlds." Arthur took a shaky breath, his hands trembling. "I never realized how deep his struggle went," he murmured. "He was such a good man, trying to make everyone happy, even if it tore him apart." He paused, eyes unfocused, lost in memories. "After he was gone, Victoria and I drifted even further apart. She blamed herself, but I think, deep down, she blamed me too. That's when everything began to fall apart. Our family, it was never the same." Isabella reached across the table, gently placing her hand on his. "Emmanuel loved you both. He wanted to make you proud, but he was only human, and the weight he carried was too much." They sat together in a heavy silence, filled with shared grief, regret, and a fragile solace. Each had loved Emmanuel deeply, and in their sorrow, they found a small connection, a chance to honor his memory together. Isabella looked at Arthur with empathy. "How did you end up here?" she asked softly, her tone gentle. Arthur sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "After Emmanuel died, Victoria was never the same. She sank into her grief, and I lost my footing too. The guilt, the mourning, it drove us apart. We had a comfortable life, but the emptiness he left behind was unbearable." Arthur's voice grew thick with emotion. "Victoria always blamed me. She said that if I'd been firmer with Emmanuel, he would have chosen a different path, stayed away from you. And, for a long time, I believed her. I thought it was my fault. In my weakness, I convinced myself she was right." Hearing this, Isabella felt a heaviness in her chest. It hurt to know that Victoria had seen her as the cause of the family's collapse, casting a shadow over the lives of those who had loved Emmanuel. "Arthur," she said gently, reaching out to touch his hand, "it wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes life takes us down paths we can't control. What happened was a tragic accident. But the love Emmanuel had for you, and for me, that love was real, and nothing can diminish that." They sat together in quiet understanding. Their grief was shared, but so was their love for Emmanuel, a love that bound them, even through years of distance and pain. Leave a comment to let us know where you're watching from and to share in this journey with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Isabella cast a soft smile at Arthur, trying to lighten the heavy atmosphere. Arthur looked back, his eyes brimming with tears. I never thought I'd meet you one day, to learn who my son truly loved. It means more than I can say. Isabella reached across the table, resting her hand lightly on his. We share the same loss, Arthur, and that connects us. I don't know why fate brought us together today, but maybe it means something greater. They sat in quiet reflection, letting the weight of their revelations settle. In this unexpected meeting, they found a fragile peace and understanding, bonded by their love for Emmanuel and the grief that had shaped them both. After a moment, Isabella gently placed Emmanuel's watch back in Arthur's hands. He fastened it around his wrist, a solemn expression on his face as if reclaiming a cherished piece of his son. This watch, Isabella's voice softened, filled with reverence. It was a symbol of our future, our dreams. Now, it's a reminder of the love Emmanuel carried with him. Arthur looked down at the watch, feeling its weight not just on his wrist, but in his heart. Though sadness lingered, they both felt a sense of healing, a way to honor Emmanuel's memory together. It's more than an accessory, Isabella added softly. It's a symbol of the time we spent with him, of everything we shared. And as painful as it is, it reminds me that time continues to pass, and that we have to keep moving forward. Arthur smiled, a sad but grateful expression crossing his face as he absorbed her words. I don't know how to move on, he admitted. After we lost everything, our home, our family, Victoria and I ended up on the streets. Now, we're just surviving. A wave of empathy swept over Isabella, making her shift in her seat. And where is Victoria now? She asked softly, her heart tightening. Arthur lowered his head, his voice barely a whisper. She's waiting for me, in a nearby square. We have nowhere to go, and she's even more broken than I am. Isabella felt a surge of compassion. She couldn't let this moment end, not with so much pain and history between them. Come, she said, her voice steady. Bring her here. Let's talk, and see if we can find a way forward together. For the first time, Arthur looked at her with a glimmer of hope, as though a small light had flickered back to life within him. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. I want to see Victoria, she said firmly. I want to help both of you. I can't change the past, but I can try to improve the future. Her heart raced as she walked alongside Arthur through the bustling streets, the conversation in the café still echoing in her mind. Here she was, walking with the father of the man she had loved, on her way to meet the woman who had once despised her. Isabella understood the difficulty of the moment, the inevitable tension, yet a quiet resolve assured her that this was the right thing to do. Arthur led her in silence, his steps slow and weary, each movement carrying the weight of years and hardships that had worn him down. Isabella's gaze drifted around her, but her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Facing Victoria had always seemed impossible, and just the thought of Emmanuel's mother stirred a tremor within her, but she couldn't turn back now. After a few minutes, they reached a small hidden square tucked between old buildings. It was a quiet, worn place, mirroring the weary spirits of Arthur and Victoria. A few people sat on benches or strolled by, absorbed in their own lives. Arthur pointed toward a distant bench where an older woman sat, her hunched posture and downcast gaze revealing her silent despair. Isabella's heart tightened as she took in the sight of Victoria, once a figure of judgment and rejection, now vulnerable and defeated. She took a steadying breath, ready to bridge a gap she had once thought unbridgeable. Under the shade of a large tree sat Victoria, and the sight took Isabella aback. The proud, commanding woman she had known years ago was now a fragile, weary figure, hunched over in a worn coat, her gray hair loosely tied back. Her once bright eyes stared vacantly ahead, clutching a small, tattered bag beside her. Arthur approached cautiously, as if fearing to reopen an old wound, with Isabella following closely, her heart pounding. As they neared, Victoria lifted her gaze, her face showing exhaustion, which quickly shifted to surprise and distress upon seeing the unfamiliar woman beside Arthur. "Arthur," she murmured, her voice hoarse and weak. "Who is this woman?" Arthur hesitated, searching for the words that could bridge years of misunderstanding. "Victoria," he began gently. "This is Isabella." She was someone important to Emmanuel. The name Emmanuel fell between them like a stone, stirring waves of tension and unspoken emotion. Isabella felt the weight of the unspoken pain between them, years of misunderstandings and lost love. Victoria's face tightened as her gaze shifted to Isabella, a flash of hurt and resentment in her eyes. "Isabella," she spat, her voice filled with resentment. "You are the woman who took him away from us, the cause of all our misery." Isabella felt the sting of Victoria's words but held her ground, standing with quiet strength. She was prepared for this confrontation, ready to offer understanding, and maybe a chance for healing. Under the shade of a large tree sat Victoria, and the sight took Isabella aback. The proud, commanding woman she had known years ago was now a fragile, weary figure, hunched over in a worn coat, her gray hair loosely tied back. Her once bright eyes stared vacantly ahead, clutching a small tattered bag beside her. Arthur approached cautiously, as if fearing to reopen an old wound, with Isabella following closely, her heart pounding. As they neared, Victoria lifted her gaze, her face showing exhaustion, which quickly shifted to surprise and distress upon seeing the unfamiliar woman beside Arthur. "Arthur," she murmured, her voice hoarse and weak. "Who is this woman?" Arthur hesitated, searching for the words that could bridge years of misunderstanding. "Victoria," he began gently. "This is Isabella." She was someone important to Emmanuel. The name Emmanuel fell between them like a stone, stirring waves of tension and unspoken emotion. Isabella felt the weight of the unspoken pain between them, years of misunderstandings and lost love. Victoria's face tightened as her gaze shifted to Isabella, a flash of hurt and resentment in her eyes. "Isabella," she spat, her voice filled with resentment. "You are the woman who took him away from us, the cause of all our misery." Isabella felt the sting of Victoria's words but held her ground, standing with quiet strength. She was prepared for this confrontation, ready to offer understanding, and maybe a chance for healing. The accusation hit Isabella hard, but she steadied herself, determined to remain calm. She knew that any chance at reconciliation would require patience and understanding. "Victoria, I understand that you see me this way," Isabella replied gently, yet firmly. "But I'm here to help. We can't change what happened, but perhaps we can find a way to move forward." Victoria shook her head, gripping her bag tightly as her hands trembled. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I lost everything. My son, our life. None of it makes sense anymore." Isabella felt a tightness in her chest, seeing the raw pain in Victoria's eyes. This once strong, unyielding woman was now a shadow of herself, devastated by Emmanuel's absence. Taking a tentative step closer, Isabella softened her voice. "Victoria, I know nothing can replace what you've lost. Emmanuel was a light in my life too. Losing him shattered my world as well. But maybe we can find some comfort in our shared grief. Together, we might find a way to honor him." Victoria's gaze flickered, and for the first time, a small crack appeared in her guarded expression. It was just a hint, but Isabella clung to it with hope, believing that even in their shared sorrow, there might still be a way forward. Arthur knelt beside Victoria, holding her hands with gentle strength. "Dear," he whispered, "I know you've suffered. So have I. But today, by chance, or maybe by something more, we found Isabella, and she's willing to help us. Maybe it's time to stop running from the past." Victoria looked from Arthur to Isabella, her expression filled with confusion, pain, and a lingering suspicion. "Why now?" she asked, narrowing her eyes, searching for any hidden motives. "After everything we've been through, Why would you show up to help us? You owe us nothing." Isabella moved closer, kneeling beside Arthur to meet Victoria's gaze. Her voice was soft but filled with deep emotion. "I loved Emmanuel, and that love has never left me. I know we've all lost so much," she said steadily, "but I'm here because I believe this is what Emmanuel would have wanted. He taught me to forgive, to care for others even when it's hard. Wherever he is now, I believe he would want me to reach out to you." Victoria remained silent, her gaze fixed on Isabella, though her eyes softened slightly. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Isabella could see the internal struggle in Victoria's gaze, a war between wounded pride and the yearning to finally let go. After what felt like an eternity, Victoria released a long, exhausted sigh, as though years of tension were finally slipping from her shoulders. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Arthur gently squeezed her hands, his voice soft and encouraging. "Just say you'll accept help, Victoria. Let's try." For him. Tears filled Victoria's eyes, and for the first time she nodded, a small, tentative gesture that held both surrender and a glimmer of hope. "We've lived this way for so long," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her rigid posture softened, and a vulnerability she'd kept buried began to surface. "I don't know if I can trust again." Isabella offered her a warm, encouraging smile. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but let me try to help. We'll take it one step at a time." She paused, gathering her courage. "I have space in my home. You can stay with me until we find something better." Victoria looked to Arthur, who returned her gaze with gentle hope. Finally, she nodded, letting her tears fall freely. I accept." Isabella's smile brightened, and in that moment, something profound shifted between them. The road to healing would be long and challenging, but for the first time in years, Isabella felt they were all taking steps toward peace, understanding, and the possibility of a brighter future together. As the first rays of morning light filled Isabella's cozy living room, Arthur and Victoria stirred, adjusting to the warmth and safety of their new surroundings. Isabella's home, inviting and elegantly furnished, was a stark contrast to the hardships they had endured. Sitting by a large window, Isabella held a hot cup of coffee, watching the sunrise with a tangle of emotions: hope, apprehension, and determination. Having Arthur and Victoria here was more than an act of charity. It was a step toward mending old wounds, forgiving, and perhaps finally moving beyond the grief that had cast a long shadow over her life. She hoped this fragile new beginning could lead them all toward healing and peace. Victoria appeared in the doorway, hesitating as she adjusted to the unfamiliar reality of being under Isabella's roof. The once proud, fierce woman now looked fragile, her shoulders hunched under the weight of years and loss. But in her tired eyes, Isabella saw a faint glimmer of something, perhaps a spark of hope. "You're up early," Isabella said softly, offering a gentle smile as she gestured to the sofa beside her. "Would you like some coffee?" Victoria paused, as though debating whether to accept the kindness, but then slowly lowered herself onto the sofa. "Yes, I'd like some. Thank you." Isabella poured a cup and handed it to Victoria, who wrapped her fingers around it, letting its warmth seep into her cold hands. The silence between them was thick, yet it lacked the hostility that had once marked their relationship. "I still can't believe I'm here," Victoria murmured, her gaze fixed on the coffee in her hands. "If someone had told me years ago that I'd be sitting here, accepting help from you, I would have laughed in their face." Isabella offered a gentle smile, her expression softened with understanding. "Life has a way of surprising us," she replied. "Sometimes the people we least expect can be the ones who help us the most." Victoria nodded slowly, absorbing the words. The bitterness she'd once harbored began to dissolve, replaced by a cautious openness. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected alliance could be a path to healing. "I understand," Victoria said, her voice low and heavy. And to be honest, I never imagined we'd be here together, after everything that happened. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a difficult confession. I never looked at you favorably, Isabella. When Emmanuel first spoke of you, I knew immediately that you were different from what I'd envisioned for him. I always wanted the best for my son, and I thought that meant he needed someone who could help him rise in life. Isabella remained silent, her gaze gentle as she allowed Victoria to share her truth at her own pace. But now, Victoria's voice trembled as she lowered her eyes. Now, I see how wrong I was. I lost my son. I lost my life. And I blamed you for so long. I blamed you for taking Emmanuel away from us, for being the reason behind all our misfortunes. But the truth is, what happened was much bigger than any of us. Isabella felt a knot form in her throat. Victoria's confession was something she had never expected to hear. I never wanted to take him away from you, she said softly, her voice filled with sorrow. I loved Emmanuel, but I know he loved you both deeply. The decision to distance himself, it wasn't easy for him. He wanted to make everyone happy. Victoria nodded, her face streaked with tears. I was blinded by pain and pride. For years, I held on to that resentment, and it destroyed us. Not just me, but Arthur too. When Emmanuel left, I lost my footing, and I blamed you because I didn't know how else to cope with the loss. Isabella reached out and gently touched Victoria's hand. We've all carried so much hurt, but maybe we can let go of the blame and find a way forward together. Emmanuel wouldn't have wanted us to live like this. In that moment, they shared a quiet understanding, a fragile bridge of forgiveness beginning to form. Both women, bound by love and loss, found a small, precious release from the years of bitterness that had haunted them. Isabella felt her own tears spill over as Victoria's words, filled with regret and sadness, pierced through the walls she had carefully built around her heart. We've all lost, Victoria. I lost the love of my life, and you lost your son. We both suffered in different ways, but neither of us came out unscathed. Victoria reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it over Isabella's. The gesture was hesitant but genuine. Maybe, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Maybe we can help each other heal. I don't know what the future holds, but I'd like to try. Isabella nodded, her heart full of cautious hope. For the first time, they sat together not as adversaries but as two grieving souls finding solace in their shared pain. In that quiet understanding, they took their first steps toward forgiveness and a future where healing might finally be possible. Victoria quickly wiped her tears, trying to maintain a small shred of dignity. I don't know how to thank you for helping us now, after everything I put you through. Isabella looked at her with compassion. I don't want thanks, Victoria. What I want is for all of us to find peace. Guilt and resentment have eaten away at us for too long. It's time we let them go. If not for ourselves, then for Emmanuel. A timid but genuine smile appeared on Victoria's face. He would be happy to see this, wouldn't he? Isabella nodded, her own eyes misty. Yes, he would. Just then, Arthur appeared in the room, his presence gently breaking the delicate moment, but bringing a renewed, comforting energy. He looked more at ease, as though the simple joy of having a roof over his head and a comfortable bed had lifted his spirit. You two are here talking? He asked, a light smile on his lips. I think that's a good sign. Victoria and Isabella exchanged glances, then laughed softly. Yes, Arthur, we're talking, Isabella replied, waving him over. I think we're finally starting to put the past where it belongs. Arthur sighed with relief and sat down beside Victoria, gently taking her hand. I always knew that what we had wasn't truly living, not after we lost everything. The pain consumed us. But now, maybe we have a second chance. Isabella looked at the couple, her heart swelling with renewed hope. You both have a place here as long as you need it. But I hope that, in time, we can find something more permanent for you, something that lets you truly start over. For the first time in years, each of them dared to believe that healing and new beginnings were possible. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were no longer alone, and that in itself was a profound step toward peace. "You deserve a fresh start," Isabella said gently as Victoria squeezed Arthur's hand, a shy but hopeful smile appearing on her face. "Thank you, Isabella. Maybe this is our chance to finally let Emmanuel rest in peace." Time passed quickly after that morning of reconciliation, and Arthur and Victoria gradually adjusted to life in Isabella's home. The atmosphere, once heavy with unspoken grievances, was now filled with a peacefulness they'd long forgotten. Isabella dedicated herself to making them feel at home, offering not only shelter but a renewed sense of purpose. Though their transformation was gradual, the warmth and empathy around them slowly began to mend their deepest wounds. One afternoon, as Isabella was organizing papers in the living room, Arthur entered and sat beside her. His gaze was distant, but held a quiet determination. "Isabella," he began thoughtfully, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I don't want you to feel like we're taking advantage of your kindness. Victoria and I have been here for a while now, and I'm so grateful for everything you've done. But I think it's time for us to look for something more permanent." Isabella looked at him, surprised but filled with admiration. "Arthur, you're not taking advantage of anything. I'm helping because I want to, and, honestly, it's been helping me move forward too." She paused, taking in his expression. "But I understand. You want something of your own, don't you?" Arthur nodded slowly. "Exactly. I think it's time for us to build something for ourselves again. Maybe something small and simple, but something we can call home." Isabella's eyes softened as she reached out to touch his hand. "Then let's do that. I'll help you find a place, and we'll take it one step at a time. You've both come so far. I believe you're ready." In that moment, a shared understanding passed between them, a commitment to honor the past while embracing a new beginning. Together, they looked toward a new chapter of healing and hope, ready to rebuild their lives with resilience and love. Isabella smiled, touched by Arthur's honesty and his desire to start fresh. "I think that's wonderful, Arthur, and you don't have to do it alone. I want to keep helping, but in a different way. We can look for a place together, something comfortable, where you and Victoria can start anew with dignity." Arthur looked at her, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you enough. After so long on the streets, I thought I'd never have the chance to live a normal life again." "You both deserve this new beginning," Isabella replied gently, "and I'm so happy you're ready to take this next step." As they spoke, Victoria appeared in the doorway, curious. She noticed the hopeful tone in their conversation and approached cautiously. "Are you talking about leaving here?" she asked, looking between Arthur and Isabella. "Yes," Isabella replied, giving her an encouraging smile. "Arthur mentioned that you're ready to find a place of your own. I think it's a wonderful idea. Are you ready for that?" Victoria sighed, feeling the weight of the question. I don't know," she admitted, her voice wavering. "Here. I feel safe. After everything we've been through, the idea of going out there again, it makes me nervous." Isabella reached out, taking Victoria's hand. "I understand," she said gently. "It's natural to feel hesitant, but you don't have to rush or do this alone. We'll take it slowly. We can find a place nearby so you can still visit, and I'll be here for whatever you need." Victoria's eyes softened, her face relaxing as she absorbed Isabella's reassurance. Maybe I am ready," she whispered, a hint of resolve in her voice. Isabella stepped closer, holding Victoria's hands firmly but gently. "There's no rush, and we'll go at your pace whenever you're ready. The important thing is that you know you'll always have a home, wherever you are, and I'll always be here to help." Victoria gave a small, grateful smile, feeling a sense of comfort and hope she hadn't felt in years. Victoria glanced at Arthur, who gave her an encouraging look, silently assuring her that they could finally move forward. She took a deep breath, then slowly nodded. Maybe it's time to start over, but I want to do it knowing we're not alone. You will never be alone, Isabella assured her with a warm smile. This is a journey we'll take together. In the days that followed, Isabella devoted herself to helping Arthur and Victoria find a new home. Together, they looked through real estate listings, explored neighborhoods, and after a few weeks found a small, simple house. It was welcoming, in a quiet neighborhood near a park, a peaceful spot where Arthur and Victoria could stroll and enjoy the stability of a fresh start. When they chose the house, Isabella helped organize the move, ensuring everything was ready to welcome them. That first night in their new home was filled with excitement and a bit of trepidation. Despite their nerves, Arthur and Victoria felt a happiness they hadn't known in years, a sense of belonging and the comfort of finally having a place to call their own. As Arthur and Victoria settled into their new home, surrounded by the warmth and care of someone who believed in their fresh start, they realized this new beginning was more than just a place. It was a promise of hope, resilience, and the opportunity to rebuild a life they had thought lost forever. The small living room, furnished simply and bathed in gentle light, felt like a symbol of renewal. That night, as Isabella said goodbye at their doorstep, Arthur embraced her warmly. "You've given us something we can never repay, Isabella, the chance to be a family again." Isabella smiled, visibly moved. "You don't need to repay me," she replied. "Just live this new life with all the love and gratitude in your hearts. That's more than enough." Victoria, usually reserved, stepped forward and hugged Isabella tightly. "I never thought I could forgive or move on," she said softly. "But now I see that forgiveness frees us, and I'm so grateful you gave us this chance." Isabella looked at them both with affection, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We're all healing together," she said warmly. "Emmanuel would be happy to see this." As she stepped away, leaving Arthur and Victoria at the threshold of their new home, Isabella felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. The past had been full of sorrow, but now, a path forward lay before them, a chance for peace, healing, and a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, Arthur and Victoria settled into their new home with gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. They embraced the routines of daily life, reconnecting with the world around them and finding small joys in their quiet neighborhood. The three of them, Isabella, Arthur, and Victoria, stayed in close touch, meeting regularly and sharing their journeys of healing. Each step forward became a testament to the power of compassion, forgiveness, and enduring love. The adjustment was slow, but Arthur and Victoria gradually established a routine, finding peace in the simplicity of their small home. The quiet walks in the park, the humble meals shared at their kitchen table, and the comfortable silences between them soothed the wounds of their past. Isabella visited frequently, ensuring they lacked nothing, and over time, her visits transformed into warm family gatherings. They laughed together, shared stories, and talked of the future, enjoying the deep bond that had blossomed between them. Isabella had given them more than just a physical home. She had provided an emotional sanctuary, a space where forgiveness, love, and hope could flourish. On a bright Sunday afternoon, Isabella decided to celebrate this new chapter with something special. She invited Arthur and Victoria to her house, planning a surprise to strengthen the bonds they had built. When they arrived, they were greeted by Isabella's warm smile and the inviting aroma of a lovingly prepared lunch. Sunlight streamed through the windows, filling the room with warmth and a sense of renewal. The meal was a feast of comfort foods, each dish thoughtfully crafted to make Arthur and Victoria feel cherished. As they gathered around the table, Isabella raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes twinkling, "and to the family we've found in each other." They clinked glasses, and in that moment, the journey they had taken together, through grief, forgiveness, and healing, felt complete. The house filled with laughter and stories, each memory shared weaving them closer as a family. As they spent the afternoon together, surrounded by light, love, and hope, they all felt they were exactly where they were meant to be. "You've come on the perfect day," Isabella said, guiding Arthur and Victoria to the dining room. "I have a surprise." Arthur and Victoria exchanged curious glances, sensing that whatever Isabella had planned would be meaningful. They settled at the table, admiring the elegant yet simple decor, anticipation building. Before they could ask, the door to the living room opened and a tall, smiling young man entered. Isabella stood, her eyes glowing with pride as she walked toward him. "Arthur, Victoria, I want you to meet Esteban, my son," she announced, her voice filled with emotion. "He just returned from university and was eager to meet you." Arthur and Victoria's faces lit up with genuine joy, and Esteban approached with a warm, welcoming smile, extending his hand to Arthur and offering a gentle hug to Victoria. It was a meeting that felt like a reunion, as though the connection they shared had been waiting to happen all along. Isabella watched, her heart full, knowing this was more than just an introduction. It was a continuation of the healing and love she had hoped to nurture. Arthur and Victoria exchanged a warm, knowing look as they took in the presence of the young man before them. Esteban's open smile and easy demeanor put them instantly at ease. As he extended his hand, he said, "I've heard so much about you. My mother speaks so highly of you both." Sitting down together, it felt as if a new layer of family was being woven among them. Esteban's presence solidified the bond that had grown between Isabella, Arthur, and Victoria, reminding them of the healing power of family in all its beautiful forms. The afternoon unfolded with laughter, stories, and shared dreams, a celebration not only of reunion, but of love and resilience that had brought them together. In that bright, joy-filled space, the scars of the past seemed to soften, making way for the promise of new, beautiful memories to be made. Victoria's face lit up, and Arthur's eyes sparkled with genuine joy as Esteban approached the table, offering a warm handshake to Arthur and a gentle hug to Victoria, which she returned with a tender smile. "You look a lot like your mother," Arthur said with a light laugh, "and it's clear she raised you well." Esteban grinned, glancing at Isabella with affection. "I can only hope to live up to what she's given me, and I'm lucky to get to share that with you all now." Isabella watched the scene, her heart brimming with gratitude. This gathering was more than a family meal. It was the culmination of a new beginning and an expansion of the love and forgiveness she had worked to nurture. Esteban's presence seemed to symbolize a continuation of Emmanuel's legacy, in a way. Emmanuel had never had the chance to share his life fully with his parents, but now Arthur and Victoria were meeting Isabella's son, a part of her life that represented hope and the future. During lunch, the conversation flowed effortlessly, the room filling with laughter and stories. They shared memories, spoke of dreams, and found themselves united by a deep, unspoken bond. Esteban listened intently to Arthur and Victoria's stories, honoring their past with sincere interest and respect. As Isabella looked around the table, she felt a profound sense of peace. The past, once so heavy, had found its place in this shared future. Emmanuel's memory lived on, woven into the connections they had all forged. In that warm, light-filled room, each of them felt the quiet, resilient strength of love and healing binding them together, promising a future filled with hope and the beauty of new memories to come. Arthur and Victoria, once weighed down by years of pain, now seemed renewed. After the meal, Isabella suggested they move to the garden for coffee. Esteban, attentive and caring, helped Arthur walk to the outdoor seating, while Victoria and Isabella chatted about the vibrant flowers lining the path. As they settled in the garden, the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The air was filled with a peaceful calm, and Isabella took a moment to look around, feeling a deep sense of contentment. For the first time in years, everything felt exactly as it should. Breaking the comfortable silence, Victoria spoke up, her voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd feel this again. A sense of family, of belonging. I thought those things died with Emmanuel." Isabella gently took her hand, squeezing it warmly. "We're rebuilding this together, Victoria, and now we have a new chance to create beautiful memories, to live with a little more lightness." Arthur, gazing thoughtfully at the horizon, spoke softly. You know, Emmanuel left us so much more than we realized. Even in his absence, he continues to bring us together. I feel somehow that he's here, watching, knowing we've finally found peace. Isabella, Victoria, and Arthur sat in silence, each reflecting on how far they'd come. In that tranquil moment, they all sensed Emmanuel's spirit lingering with them, a quiet presence woven into the warmth of their newfound family. Esteban, who had been listening intently, leaned in with a gentle, wise tone. I believe that a person's legacy never truly disappears. Emmanuel was an important part of each of your lives, and now all of you are a part of my story, my life. And that's something I'm deeply grateful for. In that quiet moment, surrounded by family, they each felt the powerful presence of love and healing. Emmanuel's memory was alive, not in grief, but in the unity, forgiveness, and joy they shared. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the garden, they knew they had found not only peace but a lasting sense of belonging that would carry them into the future. Victoria smiled, a single tear slipping down her cheek, though this time it wasn't a tear of sadness. You're very kind, Esteban, she said softly. I think, in some way, we're all connected by something greater. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a warm glow of conversation, laughter, and a sense of long-awaited reconciliation. They shared stories and dreams, the feeling of family and newfound peace hanging beautifully in the air. As evening settled in, Isabella and Esteban took Arthur and Victoria back to their new home. At the door, Arthur and Victoria embraced them both warmly, their gratitude and joy evident in their expressions. This won't be the last time we gather like this, Arthur said, his voice filled with quiet joy. Absolutely not, Isabella replied, smiling as Esteban nodded in agreement. They each knew that this gathering was the beginning of many more, a testament to the love, forgiveness, and resilience that now bound them as family. Arthur spoke with quiet assurance, and Victoria nodded, her eyes shining with hope. With promises of future gatherings and shared memories, they said goodbye. Each heart a little lighter, each spirit a little fuller, no longer bound by the past, but united in the promise of a new beginning. As Isabella walked home with Esteban by her side, she felt a profound peace. The cycle of pain and mourning was finally closing. The past would always be a part of their lives, but now the future felt brighter than ever. After months of struggle, forgiveness, and healing, Isabella, Arthur, Victoria, and Esteban had found the peace and love they had long sought. Each of them, marked by the past, had learned to forgive and move forward, bound by a connection deeper than blood. Isabella, once weighed down by the burden of losing Emmanuel, now felt only gratitude and serenity. Arthur and Victoria, once consumed by grief, had rediscovered joy in simple moments and the power of shared love. Esteban, with his youth and generosity, brought hope and continuity, embodying a future they could all believe in. Together, they had become a new family, reborn through forgiveness and unity. In the end, they built a home filled with love and hope, ready to face the future with resilience. Though painful, the past no longer defined them. Love and forgiveness had transformed them, allowing each to find a new beginning filled with light and endless possibilities. Thank you for joining us on this journey of healing and hope. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to be the first to see our next video. Share this story with friends and check out the video on the end screen for more inspiring tales like this one.